And it gives me great, great pride to introduce to you my co-host, Mr. Alex Haley.
Well, needless to say, I thank you for the reception that you give here in my native Tennessee. That was my first incentive to come here, was it was home. And then I was sitting there listening to the things that Jane was saying, and it kind of tickled me. You know, I always think about it when I hear somebody that looks anything like Jane saying all these things about how nice and this and that and I am. And I think to myself, when I was in school, girls that looked like that ran all over me to get the basketball players. And now, yes, you did. I have a kind of historical orientation, and I tend to sit when I'm getting ready to speak somewhere, and I'll, look at the audience. I have this deep conviction that history is something very living, actually, not something old and dry as dust, and I'm very, very much aware of how much we every day are part of the continuum of history. I was kind of looking out at the audience here from left to right, people standing in the rear everywhere, every hue, color, ethnic group, religious group, and so forth, and I found myself kind of seeing an overlay of ships, because this is a country of immigrants, and everyone here, practically everyone here, ancestrally, would go back to somebody who came into this country at some time on one of those ships. In the case of the black Americans who happen to be the particular focus this particular evening, it was simply a case that they were the only unwilling immigrants, and the ships were of a somewhat different type. But fundamentally, you still speak of a nation of immigrants. And I've often thought that if I were the bitter enemy of a country like this one, which had made itself in a very short time into the foremost country in the world beyond question, the most diabolical, the most pernicious thing I could set out to try and do within that country would be to separate its different facets of people, to start them thinking about each other not as a collective group of Americans, but as this kind and the other, and set up this and that and the other kind of cliches so that whole groups of people would grow up and in many cases go to their graves thinking about other groups of people as some kind of usually negative, funny cliche rather than knowing anything really about those people. And it doesn't have to do with just that happening with black people being the recipients. Black people do the same thing in turn with others. Other groups do it cross with various others. We have this way of creating racial nicknames and refer to those groups of people as that nickname for the whole of our lives. And the loser, the greatest of all losers, is ourselves, in the sense that we missed out on so much. And secondly, the loser is the society of which we are part, which does not realize anything like the benefits it might from a much more cohesive group of Americans in action as well as in statement. In the case of the focus again of this evening, the African Americans, today, early this morning, I was telling a smaller group about something that I thought was kind of fitting. I would like to share with you a larger group. It had to do with roots, which is the thing that I'm mostly identified with. You know, after the book was written, which was an experience of its own, I began to have experiences I would never have dreamed. The first, of course, was the public response to the book. There was no way anybody ever could have thought that. And I remember another that came along, and I meant to tell that today, but I forgot to mention it, that after the film had been made, one day the producer, Stanley Margulies, gave me an address and said, you should run by there and hear this. And I was very, very busy, and I had, I don't know how many things to do, and I was really kind of irritated that he'd given me something else that he thought I should do. But I didn't want to hurt Stan's feelings, so somehow I was in the car and I got the note out and looked at it, and it was up on Sunset, and I drove up there. And it was almost as if it had been timed by the maker himself. I really didn't know what I was going, except that it had something to do with the film. But I'd seen things I never had seen with films before. I'd seen a film made, I'd seen editing, I'd seen all sorts of things. And I walked in this room, and the people recognized me, and they just sort of said, smiled and ushered me in. And then I walked in a place, and I looked at this high glass wall, and beyond that wall sat about 35 musicians, and up on the stand sat the conductor, or stood the conductor. And none of them knew I was there. I had just happened to walk in, but it was timed just about perfectly. As I walked in and stood there and recognized what they were, the conductor dropped his arm, and I heard for the first time swelling up around me the music of Roots. And I tell you the truth, I stood up there and tears just ran down my face, because somehow it had just never occurred to me. I knew about the writing because I wrote it. I knew the book was in print. I knew it was in film, but it had just never occurred to me that also there was music involved. And it was a very touching experience. But the thing I principally wanted to share with you had to do with the filming of it. About 2 years ago, a genius in television, Norman Lear, and I were partners in the making of a film we drew from my boyhood in Tennessee called Palmerstown. And Norman and I used to sit around and talk a lot. And he was telling me one day, he said, you know, sometimes miracles happen when you're filming. You can get the best writers in the world, the best directors, the best actors, the best everything, but you just simply cannot dream up and contrive that which will happen of its own sometime once in a great while. And it was just kind of abstract information he was saying to me. And I had that experience, or we had that experience filming Roots. When the decision was made to make the film, the first thing was to read through the book very clinically. In that book, in any big book, Gone with the Wind, Shogun, whatever, any book as thick as that, as Roots, you would have maybe 1,500 scenes that could be filmed. If all those films were seen, if all those scenes were filmed, your motion picture would run a week long. That's why every book has to go through this selection of certain critical scenes that when you're all done, you figure you put them together in a certain chronology, film them, and they will carry the thrust of the book. And that's the most you can hope for. I had participated in the reading of the book along with others. We had picked out the 200-odd scenes. And one afternoon at ABC headquarters, I said, well, you know, I realize that we have picked these out. I would just like to ask as the writer that there be one scene we picked out that we would make certain that no other scene is any stronger than this one. And they said, what's that? And I told them, it is that scene because I think it has a lot to do with the African influence flowing into the American culture. And that was the scene where Kunta Kinte fought to keep his name. And they agreed, and then we duly set up to make it powerful. One of the ways we immediately reached for to make it powerful was we were filming it in 2-hour segments. Miniseries was going to be showing that, so we made it so this scene would end one of the 2-hour segments. And then another way you make a scene powerful is you make the dialogue as little as possible so that the action, the visual materials carry the drama before your eyes. And we had some of the best writers there ought to be had in television. And what they scripted was that Kunta Kinte, played incomparably, as you know, by LeVar Burton, would be there with his hands strung up on a pole. The overseer was Vic Lowndes, who tragically died recently in a helicopter accident. The old slave who had tutored Kunta, Fiddler by name, was played incomparably, as you know, by Lou Gossett. And the thing was set up that Kunta would be strung up like this. Vic would be there in his cloak, and Lou Gossett was sitting on the ground. And it was arranged that Kunta would be beaten because he had refused to say the name his master had said he should be called Toby. He'd always insisted his name was Kunta Kinte, and so the word had come down, break him, make him say what his name should be. And it was going to be set up that he would be beaten and beaten until finally he would weakly say Toby. Then the script called for him to be cut down, and it would be that he would slump down and Lou Gossett, Fiddler, would catch him in his lap, and then we planned to just throw the lens wide so the film would just go kind of fuzzy, and the 2-hour segment would end on that, and we figured that emotionally that was about all anybody could stand. We were filming one morning in Savannah, Georgia. Everything went perfect. And the role played by Vic Lowndes, he's a beautiful guy, he was. He played that overseer so evilly. I told Vic one morning, I'm sorry I created you. And, he would say, what's your name, boy? And Kunta, strung up, would say, Kunta. And Vic would nod, the lash would hit 2 or 3 times. His body would just convulse under the force of the blows. And then, again, what's your name? And again, Kunta, more blows. And it went on until it was perfectly apparent visually he simply, physically, humanly could not survive anymore. And then weakly, LeVar said, Toby. And Vic turned triumphantly as the script called for and said, louder, let me hear it again, boy. And LeVar said just a little bit more loudly, Toby, massa. And then triumphantly, Vic turned and said, cut him down. And that was supposed to be the last dialogue, according to the script. And he was to be cut down, slumped, and we would throw the thing wide. But what happened was, the miracle was, when he was cut down, he did slump, as it called, and he went right into the lap of Lou Gossett, and we were all standing there. There must have been 50 of us standing around. The cameras are set, full of film, 3 cameras going from different angles, the sound boom right where it was supposed to be to pick up what had been said. And instead of Lou just sort of holding him so that we could go ahead and throw the camera out of focus, when we looked, there was Lou, veteran actor, tears streaming down his face, and it hadn't called for tears. And all of a sudden, Lou's mouth opens, and Lou began to talk, and this is almost heretic, and nobody said anything, not in the script. And out of Lou's mouth came, with emotion, what difference it makes what they called you? You knows who you is. You's Kunta. And then Lou convulsed, and he clutched him even more tightly, and he turned LeVar's head like a mother might an infant, very close to face to his, and he spoke words. He said, "There's gonna be a better day." And there was a beat, and then he repeated it. He said, "There's gonna be a better day." And there was just anguish in Lou Gossett's voice. And then there was a click. The last film ran through the cameras, and we used every scrap of it. And it was, without any question, the most powerful scene in the whole of Roots, I think. And I've always liked since to play back to that. All of us talked to Lou later, said, "Man, how? What happened?" And Lou said, "Man, let me tell you something. I don't know what happened. Somehow, down there, sitting there on that ground, I forgot all about being Louis C. Gossett Jr. actor. I went back 150, 70, 80 years, and I was the one who'd been trying to teach this little Guinea boy how to be a slave. But he had taught me something. He had taught me what courage was." And so Lou swore that the words he said, he had no idea he even said them. The first time he would really believe it was when he himself heard the soundtrack. They just came from somewhere. And I've always liked to feel that in some way from the source that such things come from, it was as if a symbol statement was being made, not to Kunta Kinte, certainly not to him alone, but to all of us. Not only to we who happen to be the legacies of those people who were black, but to those who are the legacies of the other ships that came from the European ports of debarkation. All of us in this country are together in a situation, as indeed this country is with the other countries of the world, sharing one planet. There's nowhere else to go. And here particularly, we are in this country, we have the different kinds, the different groups, and with our great tendency to point up our differences so much that we've almost obscured our commonalities and how alikes we are. And I think that there's going to be a better day has now begun to take some shape as we look around us. This very World's Fair is as excellent a manifestation as I could point to of a better day with us today. The challenge is up to us to make it yet better in this country, which, for all its faults, still unquestionably is the greatest in the world. And I think we better get on with the show.